Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this Zoom media conference and Facebook live stream. Today, Windsor Mayor Drew Dilkens is joined by City of Windsor Senior Manager of Parks, James Chaco, City of Windsor Project Manager, Paul Morad, and consultant Nathan Hellinga from Wood Environment and Infrastructure Solutions. They'll be providing an update on the Ojibway Parkway Wildlife Crossing, and we're also joined by members of the media and extend a warm welcome to all those residents who have tuned in to watch our live Facebook broadcast. Mayor Dilkens will provide introductory remarks momentarily, followed by a presentation and a video by members of our panel. We will conclude with opening the floor to questions from the media. A reminder to participants that you must turn your own microphone and camera on and off using the Zoom buttons in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And panelists, please ensure that your camera is enabled the entire session, but only turn your microphone on when speaking. Media members, please use the chat functions in the Zoom screen to request a question. And once the conversation has wrapped up, media members will be called on to ask questions and your microphone will be enabled. Thank you for your attendance and participation today. I'll turn things over to Mayor Dilkens to start us off. Go ahead, Your Worship.
Well, thank you very much, Dana. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we want to talk about the progress that the City of Windsor has made toward realizing our goal of building an eco-passage across Ojibway Parkway. And I've invited the project manager, the project consultant, and senior manager of parks here today to give a brief history and an overview about the proposed Ojibway Park Wildlife Crossing, and to, of course, explain the next steps and to help answer any questions. Now, the City of Windsor, we have a long history of environmental protection and conservation, and the proposed Ojibway Parkway Wildlife Crossing is the latest in a number of exciting and forward-thinking initiatives that we have undertaken over the years and are moving forward with. And just last week, our efforts to minimize harm to the environment was recognized with the highest possible rating, a grade A, from an international body of climate experts called the CDP. Now, the CDP named Windsor as one of the top 88 cities around the world who are leading global efforts to combat climate change and to protect the environment. Now, this international recognition is certainly an honor, but we're very proud of this designation. And the real reward is seeing the long-term positive impacts that our progressive actions and policies are having on our community. Now, nowhere is this more evident than at the Ojibway Prairie Complex. And Paul, today it is home to one of the most biodiverse areas in Canada with more than 4,000 species of plants and animals, many of them rare. Its future didn't always look so promising. And if you think back to the mid-1900s, it had been owned by a number of private companies with big ambitions of developing the land into an industrial complex. And at one time, steel was produced there, and the land had once been used as a testing ground for military vehicles. But recognizing the value of what one renowned Canadian botanist called a garden of rarities at Ojibway, the City of Windsor stepped up efforts to protect the land. In fact, the city acquired the first 100 acres of Ojibway land in 1957. We became one of the first municipalities in Canada to purchase private lands for the sole purpose of protecting it from development. And the returns on our initial investment, as we know today, are priceless. So thanks to the City of Windsor's proactive efforts over the years to acquire and protect, we now have 1,000 acres of significant prairie and woodlands known as the Ojibway Prairie Complex. It is home to more than 160 species of provincially rare plants and animals. And like any other valuable municipal asset that we want to last for generations, it needs our continuous protection and maintenance. And that is why we are so pleased to be launching the Ojibway Parkway Wildlife Crossing Environmental Assessment Public Information Center. This study will help us identify opportunities to provide safe passage for area wildlife and species at risk, and create improved connectivity between the protected lands and the Ojibway Prairie Complex. Now, none of this would have been possible without funding from the Gordie Howe International Bridge Community Benefits Plan, which provided $250,000 to the City of Windsor to undertake the environmental assessment for the Ojibway Park and the Black Oak Heritage Park Wildlife Eco Passage. This $250,000 is part of a larger investment of $1.5 million in seed funding to be released to the city should the project proceed. And so to hear more about this, I'm excited to have Paul here and turn things over to the City Project Manager, Paul Morad, to give an overview of the Ojibway Parkway Wildlife Crossing. Paul?
Thank you, Your Worship. So the Ojibway Prairie Complex is a collection of Ojibway Park, which is on the west side of Matchett Road. Most people are familiar with Ojibway Park. There's a tall grass prairie and spring garden natural area, as well as an Ojibway Prairie Provincial Nature Reserve just on the east side of Matchett. And then on the other side, on the west side of Ojibway Parkway is the Black Oak Heritage Park. So these natural areas are fragmented by roadways, a significant one being the Ojibway Parkway, which is a 4-lane divided highway. So as was mentioned, these areas contain a wide variety of vegetation and animal life, and very diverse vegetation, and of course, very important habitat for the wildlife that lives there. So what we are doing here is we're carrying out a study to look at a potential crossing of Ojibway Parkway. So we're undertaking a class environmental assessment, or class EA. And the purpose of that is to look at environmental and social impacts that could result from this project. Now, a class environmental assessment is basically a planning document that sets out a standardized planning process for classes or groups of activities that are carried out routinely and typically have predictable environmental effects that can be readily managed. So, we're conducting a Class C municipal class environmental assessment to look at a wildlife crossing in order to provide an ecological connection, to provide landscape connectivity and safe passage for area wildlife and species at risk in the Ojibway Prairie Complex. Next slide, please.
Forgive me, gentlemen, I am experiencing some technical difficulties. Would you be able to share your screen, please, Paul?
Yeah. Let me see here.
Excellent.
Can you see the map? So I have the map shown right now.
Yes, sir. Perfect.
And at the top is study area.
Yes.
Okay. So the study area that we're looking at, again, it's a wildlife crossing over Ojibway Parkway to link Ojibway Park with Black Oak Heritage Park. And so the study we're looking at is just south of Broadway Boulevard to the southern limits of Ojibway Park. So that's where we're looking at providing this crossing. This next slide is basically the Class EA process. 5 phases. The first phase is identifying and describing the problem, which we have done, and we'll get to that in a moment. Phase 2 is looking at alternative planning solutions. So this involved a lot of data collection, analysis, biological surveys to see what issues or impacts could arise. So basically the first step is to identify the problem and evaluate alternative solutions, taking into account environmental and technical factors. And then we identify a preferred solution to that problem. So once we've done that, we hold an agency and stakeholder consultation, and that's part of the whole Class EA process. This allows stakeholders and agencies to comment, to provide, or to ask questions, to provide comments on the proposed project, and then we would take that back and look at that. We would analyze that, and then if we needed to tweak our preferred solution, we would do that before going to before accepting that, confirming that preferred solution and coming up with some kind of design. And then after that, we would come up with a design and then hold another agency and stakeholder consultation before completing the final environmental study report. So those are basically the stages, high-level stages of the Class EA process. Now, as mentioned, both different sectors of the Ojibway Prairie Complex have different types of environments. There's woodlands, there's wetlands, a variety of wildlife, including coyote, deer, raccoon, groundhogs, and a variety of amphibians and reptiles, and a variety of plant species at risk. So these are just a few examples of what can be found in the Ojibway Prairie Complex, or the Ojibway complex. So we come up with a proper problem and opportunity statement. So we know that approximately 20,000 vehicles per day travel along Ojibway Parkway, which contributes pretty significantly to wildlife mortality. Based on that, we've taken this opportunity to look at potential wildlife crossing in order to accomplish basically three things: create an ecological connection between Black Oak Park and Ojibway Park, protect sensitive species from roadway mortality by providing a safe passage for area wildlife and species at risk, and also to protect the traveling public. That's also another important aspect there. Obviously, we want to protect the animals, but it's also protecting the public too. If there's a deer that's on the road that could, potentially cause an accident, someone might veer off the road. They might, just from the impact of the animal. So three major criteria that we look at there. And then what we want to do is identify alternative solutions based on that. So obviously there's always the do nothing or status quo alternative. And then we looked at an underpass underneath Ojibway Parkway, and then an overpass. And so each of these options are going to be weighed by environmental factors, social, economic, and of course cost, and then come up with the best solution to fulfill or to provide a solution for the problem. One thing to note for an underpass, each option has their technical difficulties as well as various impacts and benefits. So an underpass structure could be a little bit smaller, but it doesn't have that landscape connectivity. Now, to have an overpass, we would have that landscape connectivity. It would be wider. We would be able to pass a larger variety of wildlife, but of course, it will be more expensive. So in this slide here, it shows what some of those solutions could look like. So at the top left, we have a wildlife underpass example. Below that, we have a wildlife overpass example. And on the Herb Gray Parkway, if you're familiar with that, between Pulford and Todd Lane, there is an example of an overpass wildlife crossing. So on the aerial photo on the right, we have two potential locations. If you can see the orange crossing there to the north, and then the highlighted green crossing to the south. So we're looking at alternative solutions, what type of structure, locations, and the pros and cons of each one. And then we came up with what we deem as a preferred solution, which would be an overpass crossing at the north side of that drain that you saw there. So just to go over some of the highlights of why we chose that. So it's in order to avoid impacts to species at risk, plants, and protected habitat. So that came about from our biological surveys. So that's why the north option was chosen. The overpass structure has been shown to be successful at multi-species strategies and allow growth of brush, shrub, plantings, etc. It's 100% open. It could be used as a gateway feature because it is above grade. There's opportunities to integrate stormwater with that structure versus an underpass. And then it wouldn't be a significant impact to traffic flow. The only downside, of course, is it is more costly than an underpass structure. So these are all factors that we consider. This is a conceptual rendering that Nathan Halinga will explain more. And I'll just leave it at that, but this is just a conceptual rendering of what it could look like. Again, this is still very preliminary, so just to have a quick look at that, just to see what, the size and scale in relation to the existing roadway. So the next steps. So once we get all the comments and questions from the stakeholders and the public and Indigenous communities and regulatory agencies, we're going to sit down and basically go through the comments, confirm, finalize our preferred solution, and then proceed to phase 3 of the municipal class EA process and try to identify the preferred design concept. And then that will be addressed again in another public information center, which we call number 2. And again, we would solicit comments and questions from the various stakeholders and public. Once that has been completed, we would prepare the environmental study report, publish a notice of completion, and release the environmental study report for a 30-day public review. And that's basically the process for the EA. So one thing I'd like to just note too is there have been some questions about if people, pedestrians, would be able to use the overpass, what our preferred solution is. And the short answer is no. We'd like to see wildlife only. In order to incorporate pedestrian access over the overpass, it would have to be a bigger structure. It wouldn't really fulfill its purpose because animals might not use it, and we're kind of negating the whole purpose of the overpass. So I just wanted to mention that. But that's it for the summary or overview of the Class EA process that we're undertaking and where we are in that step. So I'd like to turn it over to Nathan Halinga, and he'll show a video and also give you an idea of how we kind of arrived at that preferred option. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
I'll stop sharing then, I assume.
I think you're going to have to share the video unless Dana can do that.
Can
Paul,
you still do that?
Paul, sorry to interrupt. If you have it queued up, I would appreciate if you could do the share screen and Nathan could narrate.
I don't have the video. Let me see here.
Okay. Well, Paul, while you take a look for that, I did want to take maybe a minute orienting everybody before we get into the video. So this might be a good opportunity for me to do that. So it is a brief video. It's based on the rendering that Paul showed before. It's only about a minute long, but it covers a lot of information and it does it very quickly. So I think it makes the most sense for me to just walk you through it kind of before you see it, so you know what you're about to see and you're prepared. And then I'll also try to provide a little bit of information as we go through it. So the video is intended to show the preferred solution. This is based on the stage we're at in the EA process. And it's going to show where that wildlife overpass would be, both in the location of the landscape, and also give you a sense of what the scale of that overpass would look like. It'll then transition to a ground level view, which is going to give you a different perspective. It's going to let you see kind of what the clearance looks like and just confirm that it's going to remain or keep the parkway, Ojibway Parkway, passable for all sizes of vehicles that typically use it already. And then there's another transition where the video will pull us kind of below ground and give you an underground view, which is really just provided to illustrate that there are a bunch of existing underground utilities in that right of way, and that those are items which will have to be worked around as part of the preliminary design when we move into that preliminary design phase and accommodated during construction ultimately. Following that, the video is once again going to bring you above ground, and it'll show you the slopes at both sides where you enter onto the overpass, or where wildlife would enter onto the overpass. So these slopes or approach grades have been set based on wildlife overpass guidance documents. And utilizing the slopes, we're actually able to fit the approach grade on the east side, which is the side adjacent to the railway within the road's existing right-of-way, which is rather convenient. So the video, it then shows the approaches on both sides, like I said, and it'll show that there's a plan for replanting with trees on each side of the parkway. However, we're not going to plant trees on top of the parkway. That's on tunnel tops. We don't necessarily want full-grown trees popping up on top of the overpass itself, but we would revegetate both of the ends with trees. And then as the video nears its end, it's going to return to a ground level view, showing the existing trail network and the existing trail system and how we'd have to shift that to accommodate the placement of the abutments and the piers. And lastly, it'll pan out and give you another overview of the entire structure and the surrounding landscape. So Paul, are you in a place where you can share that video with us?
Yes.
Great.
Okay, I'm just going to share screen now.
Perfect.
Yep, looks good on our end. Okay, so just a reminder, we're going to start with that kind of zoomed out view, gives you an overview of where the structure is located, its size and its scale. So structure will span Ojibway Parkway and connect Ojibway Park to Black Oak Heritage Park. The ground level view again shows us a clearance, provides a sense of scale, and the underground view paints a very good picture of just how many different utilities there are in that area. You will notice that there are yellow lines. Those are property lines. They're not actually utility lines, and those are the same property lines you can see now in the overview. Again, the tunnel relatively clear of woody vegetation. There could be some shrub plantings along the edges, but no tree. The tunnel top itself. The multi-use trail, which exists currently, will be shifted over. And you'll notice that we keep both the approaches free, and there is not a trail that goes over. It's purely a wildlife feature and to improve wildlife passage and ecological activity. So hopefully that was beneficial to everybody, and hopefully my pace where the video presentation was. With that, I've completed my portion, and Dana, I think it's back to you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Nathan, for the presentation. With that, we'll open the floor to questions from the media. Dana?
Thanks very much, Mayor Dilkens. Members of the media, if you have any questions at this time, please use the raise hand function to indicate, and I will be calling on you, beginning with Stacy Janzer. Stacy, go ahead. Please enable your microphone.
Hi, I was wondering, there was a talk about cost, but no actual numbers. Can you talk about the difference between having the overpass and the underpass?
Thanks, Stacy.
Guys, do you have a response on the cost between overpass and underpass?
Gentlemen, I just want to ensure that all of your microphones and speakers are enabled when you're trying to speak.
I think Paul and I might both, we both have the answer, but both of us might be waiting for the other to speak. So
you can go
Paul,
ahead.
if you,
I think you.
All right.
Yeah.
So the overpass structure would be roughly twice the price of the underpass. There are some considerations relative to maintenance in the underpass, which might make it a more costly option to maintain, but there is a kind of a 2 times cost increase when you go to the overpass relative to the underpass.
When you're talking about phases because there are 5 phases until it actually gets built. Do you have a timeline? If things go really smoothly and everybody's very happy, is there a date, like even a year, when you think this might happen?
You want me to address that, Nathan?
I would love it if you would address that, Paul.
Well, so we're looking at a completion date for the Class EA report in roughly March of 2021. And then after that, basically, it's subject to funding. If we could hopefully get additional funding from WDBA, that would be great, as well as city funding for that. So it really all depends on where the funding dollars will come from. Then we can actually start detailed design and go from there, design and construction. So that's where we are right now.
So just to relate that back to the slide that was presented with the 5 phases, what Paul's mentioning there is completion of phase 4, the environmental study report. The target for that is kind of March 2021. And then I guess the question is, where does funding arrive, and when can the city move on to planning for construction, which is that phase 5 implementation. So.
Thanks, Stacey. Any follow-up?
Just one question. When it comes to the overpass, obviously that's the preferred one. Is there something outside of cost that, from an environmental standpoint, you're like, this is much better than an underpass would be? Just very, like, obviously you gave a whole presentation, but just a simple what the thing is for the environment that makes the overpass more preferred.
So I guess the broad answer to that is the overpass provides connectivity of landscape that isn't really provided in an underpass option. Although an underpass will provide wildlife passage from one side to the other, you miss out on the whole ecosystem benefiting from the overpass. And we have a lot of very unique insect species that are present in the Windsor area that use those types of prairie ecosystems. Insects could utilize an overpass, insects wouldn't utilize an underpass. There's flora, plant species, which we wouldn't expect to grow in an underpass, but would definitely be potentially using an overpass to establish. So there's a lot of benefits, I guess, beyond just wildlife if we were to go with an overpass option, which makes it much more beneficial from an overall natural environment standpoint.
Thank you, Stacey. Any other questions from members of the media? That seems to be it for questions. Thank you all for your patience and for your assistance during the technical difficulties. I'll turn it back over to Mayor Dilkens to close the webinar.
That's all I have. Thank you very much, Dana. Thank you, James. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Paul, for the overview. It's exciting to see this moving forward, and I think the public will be happy. And I just recount my drive many, many years ago between Calgary and Banff on the Trans-Canada Highway, and you run across a number through that area, a number of wildlife pedestrian crossings, and they're all very important. And this one too, I think, will be a great use as we work to get control of the more of the Ojibway complex, Ojibway shores, linking the water to the rest of the complex. I think this will become even more important as the years go by. So thanks all for being here, and thanks for your presentation.